So we've been talking about a lot about diffusion, and we talked about historical causes of diffusion, and now we're going to talk about more contemporary and modern causes for diffusion. And we're going to be talking about this term globalization, and that's going to hint that we are talking about diffusion that's happening at a global scale, and we're going to talk about how this is facilitated. So the definition of globalization would be that businesses, cultures, and economies, different functions of the globe, of the world, are becoming more integrated and interconnected. So the economy of the world is a lot more prevalent than the economy of the world in the past 100 years. And why? It's because it's a lot more interconnected. If there's a recession in the United States, the whole world is going to suffer. But if the United States is doing really well, we'll typically see that the rest of the world is going to be doing better. Maybe not as good as the United States, because there are still different economies per countries, but overall we would see probably some improvement here because we do a lot more global trade interaction. There's a lot of global markets and investments. We have multinational corporations. We also have different organizations that countries are a part of, like the United Nations, that create this interconnected world that we know today. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, other social media platforms, the media, anything else on the internet has connected people across the globe because I can talk to people now across the world on these social media apps. And that leads to the very quick spread of information, ideas, or cultural elements or trends. The ability of countries and institutions to influence the world, as seen in organizations like the United Nations, where most countries are members of the General Assembly of the United Nations. So all these countries are coming together to make decisions to figure out how the world should work. Globalization can cause economic downturns at a global scale, such as in 2008 when the American stock market and economy basically crashed and the whole world suffered as a result, and their economies did plummet to some extent. So we can look here at different areas of globalization. We've talked about economic integration, and we have measurements for that, like global gross domestic product. We look at trade. We look at foreign direct investment into different corporations across the world. We look at personal contact, like people speaking on the telephone or people traveling internationally. We look at technological connectivity. We can see people are talking on the internet. We can see that there are servers that connect to different countries around the world. I can play Rocket League with people in different countries like Argentina or Germany. We also look at political engagements. We have these political organizations like the United Nations and other international bodies that have peacekeeping missions that create international treaties. We see that organizations like the UN have made laws over who owns different parts of the oceans and other maritime boundaries. And we look at government transfers such as credit that can go from country to country. And we look at these organizations maybe giving loans to other countries as well. So let's look at some examples, more specific examples of how the world has just become more interconnected and globalized. Amazon is a big reason because it's in every single continent to some extent. We can see it covers North America because that's where it's from. It's from North America. And it's mostly found in these developed countries here that have good access to internet, as also shipping and jobs and cheap resources and that sort of thing. But we can see here that there's a lot of people that use Amazon. There's billions of people available in these markets. I mean, China and India alone is over 2 billion people. North America, we have Brazil, we have most of Europe, we have Saudi Arabia and Egypt, which are big countries, as well as Australia and New Zealand. So we can see here that I can buy something from someone in Australia and it can get to where I am in a efficient amount of time. Same thing with Brazil, or maybe I want to get something from Turkey, or someone in Saudi Arabia wants to get an American product or a product from the UK on Amazon here. And that can spread a lot of different cultural traits, a lot of ideas, but it also creates a big economic integration because people are spending their money in other countries on a lot of the times American goods or American businesses. Or maybe it's a business in another country that's on Amazon as well. Now, here is another map for you. This is a cartogram, so you can definitely see that these countries are a little bit bloated here. What do you think this is? This is going to be the world artichoke production. Artichoke is a plant. You grow it, you eat it. It's pretty cool. I actually like them a lot. Artichoke production. And we can see here that there's a considerable part of the world that grows most of the world's artichokes. And you can get artichokes around the world now because we can transport them and people can buy them and they know about them now and they like them. And here we go. We can see this a little bit more now. And you can see here that there's a lot of countries in North and South America that have artichoke farms, but we can see here that they don't really make up a ton of the production. Just these countries surrounding the Mediterranean Sea have a lot of artichoke production here, and they give it out to a lot of the other parts of the world. We look at the countries by the amount of McDonald's locations as well. McDonald's has become very globalized. It's kind of a symbol now across the world. Everyone knows what McDonald's is, and their menu is kind of similar across the world. They're fast food. Their concept's pretty much the same. Everyone knows the golden arches here, but the menu can also vary. Like in India, they don't eat beef in India because that's going against the Hindu culture. So they have a lot more chicken and vegetarian options here, like the Mikalu Tiki Burger. That's a vegetarian option. We also have like the chicken McGrill for people who can't eat beef, which is pretty much most of India. We also have a filet of fish. McDonald's has other fish options across the world as well. When I went to Maine about 8 years ago, I walked into a McDonald's. They had a lobster roll, and I have not seen that since. And I think that's great that McDonald's has a lobster roll. If it has lobster in it, I don't really know. It is McDonald's after all. Let's look at an FRQ from a past AP exam. So this one is to describe how globalization of foods has influenced cultural patterns of food consumption. We were just talking about that. We were talking about how food, it can be a lot more homogenous across the world. We can also see some stimulus diffusion as well as it adapts to new areas. But we see a lot more diffusion of food across international boundaries. So we can see here that we see the global spread of various plants or animals through the food. We can see that there is a spread of ingredients, cuisine, foods, or food cultures to people around the world. We look at policies like safety regulations and labeling requirements that can affect consumer preferences as well. We see a global emergence of organic food. That's something that a lot of people have been really promoting. If you go on social media, it's nonstop. You'll see people talk about organic food. A lot of people are into kosher food, or they have to eat kosher food, particularly if they're Jewish. Globalization has popularized foods from different regions around the world, like sushi from Japan, tacos from Mexico, kebabs, which are from Turkey. I see kebabs, sushi, tacos everywhere here in the United States. People love them. They're really big here, and they spread from countries very, very far away. But now countries across the world have these foods, and people really like their foods, and are an integral part of their cultures now. Globalization alters the quantity, type, and or cost of foods. If there's a lot more people who want the food and there's not a lot of production, the food cost is going to go up. Lobster used to not be a delicacy. It used to be something that only poor people ate because there was so much of it, but now there's a lot more requirements for when you catch lobster, a lot more laws, and it's become more of a delicacy. So the cost of lobster has gone up significantly. Globalization has expanded food options. It's changed diets and or changed levels of nutrition as well. We have a lot more access to manufactured and processed foods, and countries around the world do as well because we can import or export them. And so a lot of people are eating more processed foods, even if they're not grown in those countries. Globalization has reduced the consumption of local foods as people opt for globally distributed foods like fast food, like McDonald's, which is found everywhere, processed foods, kid cuisine. Every kid liked kid cuisine in the penguin character on the boxes, or just other frozen foods as well. They may be seen as more convenient, or they see that they have more options available to them. And it's not the same thing over and over again than what's grown in their local area. Globalization provides access to crops that were formerly only available in certain climates, and or year-long access to foods that were formerly only seasonally available, because we can get them from other countries now that have different seasons throughout the year. We can also grow a lot of fruits artificially now, and in controlled environments and laboratories and gardens based on technology and studies that we've done on these on the production of these crops across the world. So this is Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. We can see the globalization of music in this image here. We can see that she did a lot. She went to a lot of different countries on this tour. She went to Japan, Australia. She went to a bunch of countries in Europe, a bunch of states in North America, as well as in Brazil. She went to Argentina as well. Lots of different areas that she went to. And we can see that her music's very popular across the world. We see that with a ton of other artists as well that do world tours. They go to countries around the world because their music is very popular there. And so they're going to know the name Taylor Swift. When I was in Italy, I heard Taylor Swift on the radio a lot, actually. I heard a lot of different other artists like Lana Del Rey on the radio as well, because they had big songs across the world here. And that's going to change. I'm actually going to talk about that. They're going to change cultural preferences. People are going to prefer maybe these English speaker artists, or they're going to prefer the type of music that's coming from certain countries like North America. We look at K-pop as another example. K-pop started in South Korea, and it's become a global phenomenon, and people like that type of music now, that type of genre, and or just music from that country, South Korea specifically. We can look at sports as well, and the globalization of sports, like soccer, which is popular everywhere. Even though American football is popular in the United States, it's the most popular sport there. Soccer is also really, really big here. And so we can see other sports, maybe like cricket, which is found in South Asia and Australia. We see other sports like in Canada, they have ice hockey, which is big because it's cold in Canada, which makes a lot of sense. Table tennis, ping pong, that's big in China. Have you ever seen the movie Forrest Gump with Tom Hanks? He plays ping pong for the U.S. military. He goes to China and plays ping pong because it's a big deal there to play ping pong. Let's talk about soccer specifically though, because we saw on that map that soccer is very, very popularized around the world. I mean, soccer competitions are a big thing. So soccer originated in England. It's English, and it spread to new areas through trade and imperialism. So let's look back here on that map here. England trades with a lot of countries around the world today, so that's going to lead to the spread of goods and services as well as cultural ideas and information. We can also see here that a lot of countries that have soccer were colonized by England, or maybe colonized by other countries in Europe that have interacted with England that may have soccer, because we can see here that other countries, Italy, France, Netherlands, Germany, Spain, all those countries, soccer is a big deal there. They also colonized a lot of countries like Brazil or other areas of South America or Mexico. England colonized the United States. They colonized a lot of Africa. They also colonized India and Australia. So that led to the spread of soccer, big time. The rise of global broadcasting networks and digital platforms allows fans from every corner of the world to watch live matches. So I can watch a match in Brazil. I can also watch a match in Sweden. They can also follow international leagues and engage with content from other countries. Soccer clubs, especially in elite European leagues, will attract players, coaches, and investments from various countries because every team wants to have the best players possible. So they're going to recruit from different countries. And that means top teams like FC Barcelona, Manchester United, and Real Madrid are brands that transcend national borders. They're not just confined to those specific countries. And it's kind of similar to a multinational corporation like Apple that's found across the world, or maybe Amazon that's also found across the world, and it's contributed to these globalized economies. International tournaments like the FIFA World Cup, UEFA Champions League, and Copa America bring together nations as well as fan bases to tune in and watch these tournaments. While global leagues and styles do dominate, there are specific global leagues for soccer and different ways to play soccer. Soccer clubs often remain symbols of local identity and pride. So we have those local sports teams. I mean, if you're in the United States, your high school probably has a soccer team that a lot of people in the area may know about. And it's kind of like global products and services can interact and adapt to local cultures under globalization. We saw that with McDonald's, where the food options available on the menu adapted to the local culture. Here's another one. This is the Coca-Cola Company. It's found in almost every single country around the world, as you can see here. And it's the most popular drink. Just not Coca-Cola in general, but any of their products is found around there. They're a big multinational corporation here. And there's only one little region, Scotland here, that has a different preference not made by the Coca-Cola Company, which is very, very interesting here. But we can see here that everyone around the world is probably going to know what Coca-Cola is, or maybe what Sprite is, because it's popular in those countries. It's globalized, and it's become a very, very big brand. So you can see maybe memes from other parts of the world talk about Coca-Cola, or they're going to understand memes made in America on Coca-Cola. They might recognize the Santa that's on the Coca-Cola bottle as well, which is pretty cool. Actually, Coca-Cola bottles and cans are made differently throughout the world, which is super interesting. And the reasons for that, I'm not going to elaborate on that, are very, very interesting. We can see here that they have social media platforms. A lot of companies have social media platforms, and people from around the world can connect to them and interact with them and be exposed to the brand and their messages and cultural traits. Let's look at another FRQ. This one's from 2015. We're going to explain one way that globalization is contributing to English becoming the world's lingua franca. And that's making me go back here to this social media page, because this social media page is just the standard Coca-Cola Instagram page. And we can see here their stuff's in English. So people interacting with this and reading this are going to be reading English. And to understand it, they're going to have to know English here. So let's look at some different responses here. Music and radio, there's a high consumption of English language music like Taylor Swift that's popular across the world. We see wide transmission of radio media in English like the BBC World Service, U.S. Armed Forces Radio, the Voice of America. We also see popular music videos, advertisements, and common jingles as well. Ba-dum-bum-bum-bum. We look at film, television, sports, wide distribution and popularity of American and British visual media. We look at Hollywood films, for example, Disney animations, which are of course from America, which are originally in English. We look at popular American shows. We look at BBC or ITV television and news, American TV commercials, CNN just as a specific news outlet that's popular in different countries as well. That's in English. Aviation in English is also a big deal because all aviation operators, all air traffic control operators have to use English. It's for the safety, navigation, and it's mandated. So every single air traffic controller, I guess that's how I would say, every air traffic control operator, that's a better term, has to speak English doesn't matter what country in, whether it's China, Sweden, Mexico, the United States, and so on. Emigration, that E in emigration means leaving. Emigration from English-speaking countries, leaving English-speaking countries, and then they're going to return to non-English-speaking countries, bringing their English and English knowledge and utilization with them. And they may spread it to family members and friends or other people in their communities. We look at industrial design and technology writing. So product directions and manuals, maybe instructions on how to build something like an air hockey table for your house. That's just the first example that came to mind. Are going to be written in English, or they be written in another popular language like Spanish or French or Portuguese. We look at print publishing. There's a popularity of English language newspapers. In a lot of countries that have multiple different official languages, like when I was in Italy, a lot of the newspapers had parts in Italian and parts in English. We look at popular magazines or journals or books or ebook sales. We look at educational opportunities. Schools in non-English speaking countries offer courses in English, or they might have exchange programs. We see this in countries on every single continent that offer English as a language. Cool factor or just a status symbol. People know English. They're going to be marketing their products with English, or they're going to have logos, symbols, or texts that are American or English or from Europe that have English in them. And they're going to be seen maybe as a marketing advantage or a consumer preference. Maybe people will prefer these English goods. Business, trade, packaging, language of business, finance, resource development, food, MNCs or contracts, they're all in English as well. The periodic table of elements actually is universal. All the symbols, like sodium is Na on the periodic table, that's universal. They don't change the periodic table based on where you are. Coding, a lot of coding languages are also in just one language that's benefited or just particular to English. It's kind of cross there where you type in words like for or loop or something like that. Supranational organizations like the United Nations or the World Trade Organization have come together with countries internationally interacting. And a country like China that speaks a lot of Mandarin might have to interact with France, which speaks French. So they're going to use English as their lingua franca to interact with one another because it's a very popular language, very popular lingua franca. There's also the language of academia, science, or medicine. So if they do a conference in any of these areas or they have published journals, they're going to use English as their primary language. We also look at tourism and travel. People go to Florida a lot to go to Disney World. They go to California, to LA, or they go to New York City. Those are big travel spots. Even going to maybe Australia, they speak English there. Or you go to England, they speak English there. They're in France, they speak a lot of English there. They speak French and English. Same thing with Italy. There's a lot of Italian, there's a lot of English there, depending on where you go. So it's becoming the language of international tourism. We can see that hotel employees know English, taxi drivers know English, tour guides, travel agents know English. Menus may have Italian and English on them, or Spanish and English on them. Airline personnel speaking a lot of English. Signage is in multiple languages. Japan has that on a lot of their roads. We look at medical tourism as well. Kind of links back to when they have medical conferences. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons for why English has just been growing so much. It's becoming so globalized today. Let's look at another FRQ though. Explain one contemporary reason. And don't be afraid with the word contemporary. It's a big word. It's a mouthful to say. Just think of it as modern. What's a modern current reason for why people in China and India are learning English here? This is an FRQ I had on my AP exam that I had to answer. So we look at the growth of business, job, and trade opportunities with companies or consumers in English language countries. Maybe they're opening a business that's operational in a bunch of different countries. Some of those speak English, so they're going to be learning English. We look at educational opportunities at school or universities within English-speaking countries. Maybe they finish high school in China and they're going to go to the United States for college. I know people from China at my university. It's a big thing. Interest by companies from English-speaking countries to trade or expand operations, or maybe they want to employ people within India or China. India has a lot of call centers for companies like Microsoft and Google, Facebook. I know had call centers in India here, and so they need people to speak English to talk to the people in the United States and other countries that these multinational corporations are based in. We look at the growth of English language on online content, entertainment, and media. Growth of English-speaking tourism to India and China. A lot of people may be coming from the United States to go to China or India. I know people who have. We look at increasing participation in international business and other organizations that can be governmental or non-governmental that use English as a global lingua franca. We also look at just tourism again, to where they're going to countries where English is widely used. Maybe they want to go to Disney in California or Disney in Florida. Maybe they want to go to Texas to see the Alamo or whatever. You know what I mean. Go Six Flags. Yeah. All right, we talk about globalization for a good bit. Let's talk about urbanization. Now, we've talked about this briefly when we did the population units, but we're going to touch on it now and expand how it connects to culture. So urbanization involves the movement of people from rural areas to cities, which are urban areas, and that leads to very concentrated, densely populated areas that we know as urban centers. Cities become economic hubs with diverse industries, offering more jobs and services and opportunities than rural area. There's so much business, so many retail, so many other outlets for you to get jobs or employment. If you go to New York, you could work on Wall Street, you could work in Broadway, you could work at the McDonald's in Times Square. There is so much available to you in New York and other urban hubs. There's a lot of opportunities. Cities attract people from diverse backgrounds. They can facilitate cultural exchange or create multicultural societies. We could see a lot of cities may have a Chinatown or a Little Italy. Urban centers often become hubs for innovation, technological development, and education due to their economic and intellectual resources. Look at Boston. Boston has so many universities there. They have Tufts, they have Harvard, they have MIT. Around the area, they have Boston College. All of these educational facilities come together and become a part of the urban center of Boston. Urbanization can lead to housing shortages because there's a lot of people. Maybe there's not a lot of space for these people. It's going to increase the cost of living as well. We're going to see maybe more income inequalities because there's so many different jobs that pay so much different amounts. And sometimes we may see the formation of informal settlements or slums as well for the people who may not be able to afford a lot of the apartments. They're going to put up their own housing that's illegal and poorly managed and environmental hazardous and that sort of thing. What about urban diffusion now? So we kind of briefly talked about urbanization. What about urban diffusion? Well, we talked about how it's multicultural. So we're going to see a lot of cultural exchange here. So these are melting pots where diverse cultures will mix together, will lead to the spread of cultural practices, languages, foods, and traditions. We see a lot of popular cultural spread or a lot of pop culture originate in urban areas. Starbucks and other specialty coffee shops originated in urban areas. Rap music started in urban areas. Chinatown neighborhoods in cities showcase how Chinese culture, including cuisine, architecture, and festivals have diffused into American urban centers like San Francisco or Boston or New York, creating culturally distinct yet integrated communities. We see that there's a faster adoption and spread of new technologies and innovations such as smartphones and other green technology that's to sustain the environment, and other public transportation systems that get people from place to place in urban areas. We look at ride-sharing services like Uber or Lyft that originated in urban cities like San Francisco, and they've quickly spread to cities worldwide. We can look at other transportation technologies as well. We see a lot of bus systems. We see that in so many different countries. Look at subways, for instance, as well. Taxi cabs. I can't think of New York City without thinking of taxi cabs. We can find that there's a concentration of businesses and industries in cities that promotes economic models, consumer behaviors. Maybe a lot of people like a certain type of coffee in a lot of urban areas. So that's going to spur up a lot of different coffee shops. Boba is a big thing that's been spread a lot in urban areas. We look at business practices as well that can spread regionally or internationally. We look at global retail chains such as Starbucks and Zara, which rated in urban areas. Starbucks from Seattle, Zara from Spain, and they have expanded at global levels that we find across the world in urban and rural areas. And a lot of times when we talk about urban to rural diffusion, we're talking about hierarchical diffusion. That's a big thing here. We're going to talk about the spread maybe of something through a social media platform. That's going to be contagious diffusion. And that's just you should be thinking about as we're going through this. Urban centers often set trends in fashion, music, and entertainment, which are broadcast and shared online. That's contagious diffusion. Milan in Italy is a big city for fashion. There's a lot of fashion shows and emphasis and education there. Paris Fashion Week's another one, which sets global fashion trends that designers, retailers, and consumers in other cities like New York or Milan will adopt, and that can shape fashion culture and pop culture around the world. Hollywood movies reach audiences across continents like Titanic, Iron Man. People know those across the world. They premiere in major cities and will influence local film industries like Bollywood or Nollywood, which have integrated Hollywood techniques and storytelling styles, but also have their own ways of creating movies as well. Bollywood specifically is one that's grown a lot recently. India is a very big country, so their culture and their film has been expanding across the world. Cities are often hubs for political activism and social movements because there's a lot of people there that you can influence and interact with. In 2019, protests erupted in Hong Kong, which is a little island off the coast of where China is, and it was against a proposed bill with China, and they were protesting it. And that's a big thing because it gets a lot of attention there. There's a lot of news media in urban areas, and there's a lot of people that can see your protests. And these large-scale demonstrations highlighted issues of autonomy, democracy, and human rights, and it resonated globally because people want rights in every single country around the world. They want to be treated well. People want to have a voice. People want to have autonomy. And so that led to international support for Hong Kong and other similar pro-democracy movements in different countries as well. Now, we talked about this before, time-space convergence, so let's just briefly review it. So, technological advances in communication, transportation, and information sharing, so like social media, we can travel places through airplanes. I can get to places a lot quicker because of these advancements. I can talk to people across the world. That all goes back to time-space convergence, and that's reduced the perceived distance between the places, and it makes the world feel smaller as these places are more compressed. So air travel reduces travel time between continents from weeks to hours. For comparison, the Mayflower took 66 days, over 2 months, to sail from England to the New World, and they were traveling at a speed on average of about 2 miles per hour. Today, you can get from England to the United States in 7 to 8 hours. Digital communication, such as the internet, smartphones, social media, enable instant communication across the globe. King George III, after the Revolutionary War ended in the United States, was given the Treaty of Paris, which ended the war, about 4 to 6 weeks after it happened. And we could just text someone in England, and in 10 seconds, they'll know that the war is over. Global supply chains allow products to be designed, manufactured, and sold in different parts of the world with unprecedented speed. So we could design a Apple iPhone in the United States, and then we can get the parts from maybe countries in Africa, then manufacture them in China, and then sell them to a bunch of different countries around the world, like Mexico, United States, Canada, or somewhere in Europe or India. So a lot of this comes together to form time-space convergence. And how does that change culture here? Well, faster travel and digital communication allow cultural traditions and elements like music, food, fashion, and languages to spread very, very quickly. I can take a picture of my food and post it on Instagram, and people from across the world are able to see it and interact with it and see what kind of food I'm eating here, and maybe they want to try it or make it. Phrases from American and British slang, I'm thinking of Sigma, Riz. I really don't want to be thinking of that, but that's what's spreading across the internet right now. Those were popularized through social media. Maybe there's Hollywood movies. Put the money in the bag. It's from a Tom Cruise movie. Those have been adopted by young people across the world. We look at other words like selfie, hashtag, vibes as well. Ideas on social issues such as gender equality, environmentalism, and human rights have spread quickly across different cultures because of social media and the media and the internet. Time-space compression allows social movements to gain global momentum as people around the world adopt similar values and practices. Widespread exposure to global brands and media can make different places feel a lot more familiar. We see that like McDonald's and Coca-Cola. They're very familiar to people across the world. Fast food chains, international fashion brands, popular media, like a lot of Hollywood movies. Marvel's a big one as well. Disney. Leads to a degree of cultural standardization, and that can sometimes reduce the distinction between different cultures, particularly local traditions, as they all have elements of these similar cultures. Let's talk about indigenous languages. So, an indigenous language is a language spoken by the original First Nation, First Island inhabitants, the native people of a place, area, or region. They are the first people, and that's the language that they speak here. So, Xhosa is an example. It's an indigenous language spoken by the Xhosa people of South Africa. It's actually one of the 11 official languages of the country. And something cool about this language is that they don't really speak with words like we're doing in English. They speak with clicks, and that's how they communicate. So people's names are just a sequence of clicks with various tones and pitches. The media, internet, consumer goods, trade, higher education, where they may learn English because it's very popular across the world. They may learn Spanish or another popular language. These are encouraging indigenous people to learn different languages and to engage with the global economy or globalized culture that won't understand or speak their indigenous language. We see that the investment of infrastructure like cellular phone networks, railways, highways, as well as ports that facilitate interaction and transportation will place indigenous people in contact with the global economy or globalized culture. And so the less isolated, globalized, and urbanized an area is, the more likely an indigenous language will survive. But the more globalized and the more urbanized an area is, the less likely an indigenous language will survive because it's not needed or it's not spoken as much. So it does not facilitate as much business or interaction as a language like English is, that's popular across the world. And we see a lot of areas where indigenous language will survive will be islands, mountain ranges, jungles, and forests where the environment will isolate them. Look at a past FRQ here. Explain how ethnocentrism affects the loss of indigenous languages here. And so when we're talking about this, I want to be thinking of ethnocentrism, where people judge a culture based on their own perspective. I'm going to be thinking of where they view indigenous languages as something negative or something that's worse off than their language or maybe harder to learn. So a majority ethnic group may adopt its language as the country's official language. The majority ethnic group may abolish the use of indigenous language in schools. So the majority ethnic group, maybe that's an English-speaking group, they may put English as the official language. They may abolish speaking indigenous languages in school over other languages like English. So those are just some examples there. Now, how can we preserve these indigenous language in a globalized world? Universities are increasingly offering courses and degrees in indigenous languages. I go to a college in Florida, and there are so many different languages that I've never even heard of that they offer, and they offer degrees in. The University of Alaska in Anchorage have offered programs focused on the preservation and teaching of indigenous language from around that area. Linguists work with indigenous communities to document and record languages that are endangered so their records are not lost, and this includes creating dictionaries, grammar books, and audio recordings of the language. Projects like the Endangered Languages Project aim to catalog and preserve such languages. Indigenous communities use social media platforms to promote their languages, maybe through videos, memes, or posts, to attract young people or just enough people in general to make the language visible and relevant. Many indigenous communities have established language classes for both children and adults to teach and practice their native languages so they don't die out. Native Hawaiians have programs like Duolingo, or they teach Hawaiian in school and community centers to spread the language. You can go on Duolingo and learn Hawaiian if you really, really wanted to. It's not that popular, but you can. What are some other ways we can promote indigenous languages through music, film, and literature? Films like Moana, which features the Maori language, have increased visibility and interest in indigenous languages. Some countries have passed laws recognizing the indigenous languages and may have made them official languages or promoting their use in official settings. New Zealand's Te Reo Maori Act, I don't know how to say that, recognizes the language as a national treasure, something that must be preserved, and it promotes its use in government and education. Governments and non-government organizations provide funding for programs aimed at preserving or revitalizing indigenous languages, bringing them back and growing them. They can support educational resources and programs, as well as community projects for a more local language. We can install rural cellular telephone, cellular data networks, and or satellite communication systems that allow indigenous people to communicate between each other and use their indigenous languages. The creation of online dictionaries, language learning apps, and websites dedicated to indigenous languages have made learning a lot more accessible to people who don't speak their languages. Or you can teach someone now a lot more quickly, or teach someone from across the world. Duolingo, of course, is a good one. They offer indigenous languages like Hawaiian or Navajo. Let's look at a practice FRQ. Describe how historically the political geography of colonialism has affected indigenous languages. And colonialism brought in languages, particularly from Europe, like English, Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese. And so they're going to be utilizing these languages in official settings and in settings where it comes to trade or business. So they're not going to be utilizing the indigenous languages. And that's going to hurt the indigenous languages or just decrease the use of it. So colonist language marginalizes indigenous language. You could say colonial power favors one indigenous language or group over another within the colony. The legacy of colonial education systems de-emphasize learning in indigenous language or context. Business and trade favors the colonist language or the development of pidgin or Creole languages. The state religious institutions impose colonist languages or translate colonist religious texts into the indigenous languages as well. So we can see here there's a lot of different ways that the indigenous languages can be influenced by colonialism. Let's talk about cultural convergence and cultural divergence. Cultural convergence is when cultures interact a lot and they become a lot more alike and similar. And this occurs through globalization, through increased communication and interaction among cultures. Many contemporary Middle Eastern artists incorporate elements of Western music genres like pop or hip-hop or electronic music into traditional styles. Maybe they're speaking a language like Arabic, but it's a pop song. Cultural divergence is the opposite, where cultural groups become very, very distinct from one another and a lot less similar. And this occurs the best through isolation, through no interaction. And this can happen when communities reject outside influences as well. They want to preserve their cultural traits or revitalize their practices and identities. So the revival of the Maori language and culture in New Zealand emphasizes a return to traditional practices and values diverging from mainstream Western influences. Let's look at another FRQ. Compare and explain why indigenous languages are less threatened in Africa than in the Americas. So Africa, there is better support from local governments that utilize these indigenous languages officially. We can also look at support from community and cultural groups, whereas in the Americas, there are fewer public and private institutions that support indigenous language use. In Africa, education, trade, employment, and shopping can be transacted in indigenous languages or in a maybe similar lingua franca like Swahili. In the Americas, basic and daily activities are done in English or some other language in the dominant culture. In Africa, there are more rural rural agriculture societies in which indigenous languages may flourish. In the Americas, a larger percent of the population lives in urban areas where indigenous languages may not be accepted or just get you very far in interactions. You're going to have to speak a more popular language like English. In the Americas, many indigenous populations have been negatively affected by disease and resettlements. They're dead, so nobody speaks their language. So it's going to be hard to have these languages stick around for very, very long. In Africa, immunity to old world diseases and the ability to maintain local indigenous social media networks like Instagrams or Discords or Twitters or whatever have resulted in the endurance of the local languages and cultural traditions. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really does help me out, and it costs $0. I have some free resources for you in the description down below if you'd like to use them. If you have any AP Human Geography related questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to leave a comment down below the video or send me a message on Discord. I'll see you guys in the next video, though. Adios.